this idea of that you need that a child of God needs to give 10% of their income to the church or to the Lord. and dear listener, that's just not found in the Scriptures. And as I said, depending on the size of the operation, it can be a really, really great burden on the people. And as I said, that leads into the idea of the church, this organization owning property. Usually it starts out with a church building or a meeting house, and then of course, as we've I think mentioned in the past, the larger the assembly gets, then the bigger you got to have bigger buildings, and then you got to have fellowship halls, and some of them put up basketball courts and all sorts of things, and the things just grow and grow and grow until it just implodes. And if you'll watch the news, you'll see that ever so often there'll be one of these big, what's called mega churches, that just collapses. I saw last year or so where this thing called the Crystal Cathedral, I forgot where it is, seemed like maybe it's out in California somewhere. And I can remember years ago seeing some of their programs on television. And they had this huge structure that was just almost solid glass, and was a sight to see. And they had thousands upon thousands that would come there to those big meetings, and they recorded those services and put them out on television and so forth and so on. And now that's all collapsed. The man that was the main speaker there, I guess you'd call him I'd call him the hired preacher. He's got, or did have, the quote church sued after they declared bankruptcy, and claiming that they beat him out of several $1 million. And it's just as my uncle used to say, it's just a disaster. It is truly a disaster. You can read back. I was reading a book the other day that was written in, I believe, 1945. And the author was speaking about the problem back then. They had that some of these churches that had been organized and had their meeting houses built and paid for probably, didn't want to use mechanical instruments of music in their singing, in their worship service, or accompanying their singing, I should have said. And there were others who did want to have it, so they would have different ways. I read years ago of one where that a group of the certain number of those people had their meetings in that building. Just in the middle of the night, on Saturday night, they moved the piano into the church building, and the next in the morning on Sunday for their meeting, when the rest of the crowd got there, why, a lot of them were shocked, and they said, "Well, we can't in good conscience worship with this." And the others said, "Well, we've got the vote. We'll just take a vote on it," and they voted to have it there. And the ones that didn't have, that couldn't in good conscience continue, they had to leave, and the majority took the meeting house. And it happened a great deal like that. And then I'd never heard of it before, but as I was reading the other day, what I mentioned, this man was talking about how that some of these congregations of people, these organized churches, had got wise, and they would, when they wrote up the deed for the property and the church building, they had it specified in the deed that no instrument of music could be used in that building, and that keeps from having their buildings taken away from them. And there's a place not too many years back, right up here in Tracy, Tracy, Tennessee, or Tracy City, where that a group of people, I think, I forgot, they were what I would call some type of Pentecostal nature, and I don't know how they got into it, but I was told that the local church, the organized church there, had to buy the church building from the headquarters of the organization they were associated with, because they didn't want to go along with something that they didn't agree with. Now, I'm talking about all this just to give you an idea of how this practice of organizing churches involves so many complications, problems, and difficulties. And there's another thing that several sessions back that I talked some about, was people having their church recognized by the state or the government to be a non-profit organization, and when they're recognized as a church, and they could get a certain classification by filling out so many forms and whatever, and they won't have to pay taxes, but they're registered with the government, and they're attached to the government, and you watch it, the controls are getting a little more strict, and I'm of the sincere conviction that one of these days these organizations are going to wish that they were not recognized by the government. But I'll get off of that. Another thing I've got listed here in my notes is that when you have what I'm calling organized churches, then you have an organized or orchestrated assembly and the service in those meetings. The general number or the congregation of people gathering there often just become the audience, or we might describe them as observers, and they're basically just there to observe what goes on, and in some cases I'm convinced it's a matter of entertainment. I remember years ago when we were overseas, that we lived in a little place close to a church building, and they were very loud in their meetings, and they played real loud music and a lot of hollering and screaming and going on, and they had what they call dancing in the spirit, and I'll tell you, it was about like some of these concerts that I hear about. All of this, you see, works the people up, and they feel like they've had a great experience, and draws a crowd. And of course, the more crowd you can draw, most of the time, the more contribution you can collect. You may think I'm trying to be ugly about it. I'm really not. I believe you'll check it out, you'll see I'm just stating the facts. Now, here is one of the major things that I see here in this situation, is when you organize a church and give it a name, you have denominated it. And then people who are members of that denomination then feel obliged or obligated to defend, uphold the organization itself and its teaching and practices. And that gets develops into a situation where that if you are asked, if somebody asks you say, what faith are you? And you tell him, well, say that, well, I won't even name any name this time, but you tell him what the faith is, and he said, well, I know what they teach, you know, and I don't go along with that. And, you know, so I can't have anything in common with you. And it gets where that it ruffles people's feathers, and they get upset, and there's more friction, producing more division. It's just a sad situation. And finally, I would remind you again, as we have stressed in the last few discussions, and actually several times in the past, that to organize churches, to take a handful of those people who have been saved and added to this assembly that God is calling out of the world, and put that into organize it into a church, then we've got a situation where that we have created a denomination. It is a division separate and apart from other disciples of Christ, who in turn have their own name and organization. And it, my dear listener, the only way I can't get around it, it is walking contrary to the commands of the Lord, which the Apostle Paul said he wrote to the Corinthians, those called out in the city of Corinth, and said that there ought not to be divisions, and some calling themselves saying, I'm of Apollos, and I'm of Paul, and I'm of Peter. He said, if you're doing that, you're walking after man's way and not after the Lord. And he said that, that the things that he wrote on them were the commandments of the Lord. To organize these churches, to give credence to them, to be members of an organization, knowing what the Scriptures teach on it, beloved, I'm fearful about that. And I really believe if you will just give some serious thought and study to it, that you will be greatly concerned about it too. Okay. Now, I've over and over hammered and hammered on the problems and that's involved here, and the dangers. So, let's ask this. What is the solution? What can be done about it? I will make some suggestions. First of all, I would suggest that we stop organizing and naming churches. Just stop it. That'd be the first suggestion. And secondly, I would say we need to get rid of all these existing organizations. Just get rid of them. Just disorganize them, disband them, and say, let's just all be Christians, and we sit down and we'll just keep studying and trying to learn more of God's will, and we can draw closer together and be united more and more on the teachings of the apostles and prophets of Christ. Now, that's a radical statement when I say to get rid of all these denominations. And I'll tell you what we need to do. We just need to sweep them off. Just get rid of all of them. And do away with it. But somebody say, well, Grady, you know that's never going to happen. And you just barking up the wrong tree. It ain't going to happen. Well, you know something? Just to tell you the truth, deep down in my heart, I figure you're probably right. I don't at all expect to see the day when all these religious organizations and corporations is swept off the face of the earth. And all the disciples of Christ striving to be one, to be united, to live in peace and harmony, and try to get closer and closer back to the teaching of the New Testament, the writings of the apostles and prophets of Christ. Well, let me ask a question here. We've agreed. The listener's probably going to say, Grady, it's never going to happen. I say, okay, I figure you're right. So, why not? Why? Why did we have to agree that we don't expect to see all these churches disbanded and people take down all their human names and everybody say, hey, you know what? I'm willing to look and see what I've been wrong about. And over I've told you in this series of discussions, I've been wrong about a lot of things. And I'm probably, most likely, just about sure, I'm wrong about some things now. But I'm trying to learn more of the will of God and share it with other people. So why won't our people willing to do that? Well, let me give you some suggestions why. One of the first ones that comes to my mind is, check my time there, I think we're all right for a little while. One of the first things that come to my mind when people say, why is this not going to, why can't we get this confusion straightened out here and get rid of it? Because too many people have their living off of these churches, these organized, man-named institutions. Dear listener, do you think for a minute that the Pope in Rome is going to come down off of his throne and disband that worldwide organization? I doubt it. Likewise, how many hired preachers, men that have a good salary because they're paid as professionals, to get up and teach, preach the sermons? You think how hard it's going to be for them? Some of them don't even have any other means of support. They've gone to school for that very thing. They are not. They're like, it reminds me of that situation where Jesus told about the unjust steward. This man is in charge of the owner's property, and he was about to lose his position. And he said, he was thinking, he said, I can't dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. So then he went to call these people in and change the amount of money they owed and so forth, so he could get in with them, and they'd take him in when he got kicked out of his job. Well, you know, that's the kind of situation that a lot of these people will be in. The average Joe that's drawing a big salary, and that's all he knows to do, and he's got a wife and kids, and even if he thought that it might be wrong what he's doing, it would be hard for him to give it up. But now, dear listener, that cost people a whole lot more than that to be just a Christian back in the days of the apostles. And there's people today that are trying to follow Jesus Christ and that are paying the price for it. And my understanding is that they're being killed in various places of the world from time to time right now today. And so yet I'm going to say that's one big reason why that we're not ever going to get rid of all these humanly organized churches with their human names and doctrines. Let's see. Yeah, I wanted to turn over here to John chapter 11. In just a few minutes I've got left here, and I'm going to read several passages like this, hopefully, and starting in our next discussion. John chapter 11. Let's see. The rulers of the Jewish nation there in Jerusalem were really getting all tore up about the popularity that Jesus was gaining and the kind of teaching he was doing. And let's see, where's the record here? What I got the record, but I want to see the context. Yeah, that's right. That's what I thought it looked like there. It's the case where that Jesus had raised Lazarus from the dead. And it says here in John 11 that it's about verse 45 said, many of the Jews which came to Mary and had seen the things which Jesus did believed on him. But some of them went their ways to the Pharisees and told them what things Jesus had done. Now that's hard-hearted right there now. To see Jesus raise a man from the dead and then say, we're going to go tell the rulers what's going on here. And then these rulers called a meeting, and they said, and when they got together, somebody says, what do we? For this man doth many miracles. And so what are we going to do about this? It said, if we let him thus alone, all men will believe on him, and the Romans shall come and take away both our place and the nation. They said, we've got to stop this. If we don't, we're going to lose our high-paying positions and all of the praise that we get, and our whole nation will be destroyed. When I'm of the sincere conviction that they were primarily concerned about losing their own place. And that's why I suggest to you, that is another reason why I suggest to you now that we're not going to we're not be able to get rid of these organized churches. And I want to drive that point home a whole lot more here, because I believe that's would be one of the main problems. I'm going back to John chapter 7 here now, and I'll see about verse 12 and 13. It's talking about, again, Jesus and his teaching and so forth. And they were having a big feast there, one of the Jewish feasts. And these people were talking about Jesus. And let's see what, I want to start here about verse 12. So there was much murmuring among the people concerning him, for some said, he's a good man. Others said, nay, but he deceiveth the people. And said, howbeit no man spake openly of him for fear of the Jews. They knew that their rulers opposed and hated this Jesus of Nazareth. And some of them said he's a good man. Some said, no, he's a deceiver. But nobody that would dare openly say anything about him, because they were afraid of their rulers, what they would do to them. Now skip on over here to John chapter 9. There's another similar example where Jesus healed that blind man. And they had a trial over the deal there in front of the Jewish leaders. And they called in that blind man's, formerly blind man's parents, the man Jesus had healed, and they started questioning them. And let's see if I can find where I want to. John 9, I want to remember chapter 8. I find it now, maybe. John 9:22. They asked this parent, said, "What about this man? Was he blind, born blind, whatever?" And asked a question about them being healed. And the parent said, "By what means he now seeth, we know not, or who hath opened his eyes, we know not. He is of age, ask him. He shall speak for himself." And it says here, these words spake his parents because they feared the Jews, for the Jews had agreed already that if any man did confess that he was Christ, he should be put out of the synagogue. Same situation for all your professional hired preachers. They know in their heart that if they even speak a little bit contrary to the creed or the common tradition of that organized system that they are hired by, they'll lose their check and it'll be out on the road without any money. And I can tell you that by experience, personal experience. But it's worth it. It's worth it. I think my time's about up right there. I'm not saying these things to try to hurt anybody. I'm saying them because I honestly believe that our present situation with all these different organized systems called churches, is a hindrance to the salvation of souls. Thank you for listening. For being willing to consider the things that I hope to share with you concerning problems, difficulties, divisions, and so forth that are created and promoted by people organizing, maintaining, and supporting organized churches. I made a note here in my list of notes to start back up here with the process that we were in, and talking about things that would hinder or prevent the elimination, the doing away with all organized churches with human names, human organizations. Now I call your attention to John chapter 12, John's record of the gospel, his testimony concerning Jesus Christ. And we're going to start about verse 42. John 12:42. This, of course, during the ministry of Jesus Christ here upon the earth, says that nevertheless, among the chief rulers, that is, of the Jews, also many believed on him. But because of the Pharisees, they did not confess him, lest they should be put out of the synagogue. And here is an astounding statement. And we'll bear careful notice from any sincere seeker of truth. For they loved the praise of men more than the praise of God. Shall I read that again? For they loved the praise of men more than the praise of God. Dear listener, these people were convinced that Jesus of Nazareth was the long looked for Messiah. But they would not